Okay, so today we're diving into the life of a 19th century clergyman, Reverend Thomas Blandford. But this isn't just going to be about dates and sermons.
Not at all. This is about uncovering the story of a man who was deeply involved in the social movements of his time, challenging norms and building communities.
Right, and we've got a ton of fascinating material to work with. Genealogical records, newspaper clippings, even a cemetery inscription.
Each one's a little window into the past, helping us understand not just who Thomas Blandford was, but also the world he lived in. A world on the brink of massive change, by the way.
Oh yeah, the Industrial Revolution, social upheaval, the works. So where does our man Thomas fit into all of this?
Well, he was born in 1827 in Milbourne Port, Somerset. Following in his father's footsteps, he became a glover.
Gloves. Seems like a pretty traditional start, right?
It might appear that way on the surface, but Milbourne Port wasn't just about gloves. It was a hub for nonconformist religious beliefs, groups that dissented from the Church of England. They often had more progressive social and political leanings.
So a mix of tradition and independent thought. Huh. Interesting. Did that influence his decision to become a clergyman?
Possibly. But there's a bit of a gap in our knowledge. We know he was apprenticed as a glover at 14, but then, boom, 9 years later, in 1850, he pops up in Oakham, Leicestershire, as a pastor.
Wow. Talk about a career change. From gloves to guiding souls. Was that a common move back then?
Not really, especially not how he did it. He was lent to the Oakham congregation by the Home Missionary Society.
Lent, like a library book.
Precisely. A trial run for him and the congregation. And, get this, the church meeting book suggests he wasn't even sure he wanted to stay long term. He preferred being an agent of the Home Missionary Society.
Hesitant, huh? What did the congregation think about that?
They were pretty keen on keeping him around, actually. Within a few years, they were practically begging him to become their permanent pastor.
Sounds like they saw something special in him. What was it about Thomas that won them over?
Unfortunately, the records don't delve into personalities that much, but they held a meeting in January 1854 and voted unanimously to request his ordination. That's a pretty resounding vote of confidence, don't you think?
Totally. So what did he say? Was he ready to ditch the temporary gig for a permanent pulpit?
He took a little time to reflect, but on February 17th, he accepted. Thomas Blandford officially became the pastor of the Oakham Independent Chapel.
All this is happening in the 1850s, right?
Yeah.
Pretty wild time to be alive with the Crimean War and everything else going on.
Exactly. The world was changing fast, but even amidst all the turmoil, something pretty remarkable happens in Blandford's life. Something that speaks volumes about the kind of man he was.
Okay, so we've got Thomas, our dedicated pastor, navigating life in a world that's changing faster than ever. What was that remarkable event you mentioned? It must have been something pretty major to stand out against a backdrop of war and revolution.
It really was. We're talking about something that speaks volumes about his character and his commitment to, well, a bigger picture. In 1851, right in the middle of his time in Oakham, he gets invited to attend the 5th Peace Congress. And not just any peace congress, mind you. This was the 5th one in the entire world.
Wow, the 5th one ever. So this was a brand new idea, a movement just finding its feet, and attending back then.
Yeah.
It wasn't like hopping on a plane. What did that even involve?
Exactly. International travel in those days, that was a serious undertaking. We're talking weeks, maybe even months, on horseback or rickety trains. And don't forget, this is 1851, not exactly a peaceful time. This Congress was radical, advocating for peaceful solutions when the world was pretty keen on conflict.
So for Thomas to even get invited, let alone make that journey,
Yeah.
that tells you something about the kind of guy he was. This wasn't just some intellectual exercise for him. He was putting his beliefs into action.
And here's the thing. It wasn't just his decision. His congregation, the very people who fought to keep him as their pastor, they were the ones who requested he go. They saw how important this movement was, and they trusted him to represent them on a global stage.
Wow, that really speaks volumes about the kind of community he was building in Oakham. They weren't content with just talking about peace among themselves. They wanted to be part of something bigger. So we've got Thomas, the peace advocate, braving the wilds of 19th century travel to attend this groundbreaking Congress. Did this experience shape his path? What happened next?
He stayed in Oakham a few more years, but then things take an interesting turn around 1855. He takes on a new role, moves to the coastal town of Herne Bay to lead the Herne Bay Congregational Church.
From rural Leicestershire to the seaside. That's quite a change. Was it a typical move for a pastor back then, or was there more to it?
On the surface, it might seem like a simple relocation, but remember, Blandford wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. He thrived on building communities, and it seems Herne Bay offered a whole new set of opportunities for him to do just that.
So what did he do? Did he keep up his peace advocacy in this new community?
He did, but in a different way. This time it wasn't about international congresses. It was about putting down roots, establishing a strong foundation for his congregation, and quite literally building a community from the ground up.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. Tell me more about this building process. What exactly did he achieve in Herne Bay?
During his time there, and we're talking over 2 decades, he wasn't just a pastor. He was a builder in every sense of the word. He was instrumental in getting a new congregational church built, establishing a mission room in nearby Broomfield, even overseeing the construction of a manse.
Hold on, a manse. Sounds like something out of a period drama.
Yeah.
What exactly is a manse?
It's basically a house provided for the minister and their family. Think of it as a way for the church to support their pastor and make sure they had a stable home within the community. This particular manse, built in 1876, it's still standing today. A real testament to Blandford's lasting legacy in Herne Bay.
Wow, to think that something he helped build is still standing over a century later.
Incredible. But let's talk about the church itself. What was the religious scene like back then? Weren't there some tensions between different denominations?
You're right, Victorian England was a time of huge religious enthusiasm, but it wasn't exactly a uniform landscape. You had the established Church of England, of course, but also this growing movement of nonconformist denominations, like the Congregationalists, who championed a more independent approach to faith. And they often had more progressive social and political views, too.
So Blandford's right there in the thick of it again, at the heart of a movement for change. It's like he had this knack for being where the action was, whether it was promoting peace on a global stage or challenging the established religious order in his own backyard.
And it doesn't end there. In the middle of all this building and community work, he also finds time to get married. He weds Jean Douglas in 1860, and they start a family.
Of course. Can't forget the love story. So they settle down in Herne Bay, raise a family. Anything interesting about their life there? Well, remember we talked about Blandford's knack for challenging the status quo. It seems that extended beyond the church walls and into the very fabric of the community, even influencing how they approached death and remembrance.
Okay, now that's a curveball. What on earth does he have to do with death and remembrance?
It all comes down to the Herne Bay Cemetery. During the planning stages, there was this debate about the layout, specifically about whether to have separate chapels, one for the Church of England and one for nonconformist denominations.
And I'm guessing Thomas, being a nonconformist minister, had some thoughts on that.
He did indeed. He could have easily just gone along with the plan, but he saw it as a divisive thing. To him, this wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about creating a space that encouraged unity and inclusivity, even in death.
Wow, talk about putting your money where your mouth is. He wasn't afraid to challenge the norm, even when it came to something as sensitive as burial practices. So what happened? Did he stage a one-man protest against separate chapels?
He didn't have to go it alone. He rallied other members of the community who shared his concerns, and together they took their case straight to the top, the Archbishop of Canterbury himself.
You're kidding. He appealed to the Archbishop over a cemetery layout. That's bold. What did the Archbishop say about this whole chapel dilemma?
You might be surprised to learn that the Archbishop actually sided with Blandford and the community. He agreed that a single chapel situated between the consecrated and unconsecrated burial grounds would be better for everyone.
No way. He took on the Archbishop and won. That's amazing. He really knew how to stand up for what he believed in and get others on board.
It really shows his skills in diplomacy and finding common ground, even when people had different views. He wasn't just interested in winning an argument. He genuinely wanted to create a more inclusive and unified community.
So after all this building, advocating, and community organizing in Herne Bay, did he ever leave? Did he settle down permanently in this seaside town? So after all his work in Herne Bay, did Thomas ever slow down?
You'd think after 25 years in Herne Bay he'd be ready for a slower pace, but not Thomas Blandford. In 1881, he sets his sights on a new challenge, moves to Westgate-on-Sea to be the pastor for a little place called Christ Church.
Okay, another new town, another church. This guy was like a church-building machine. It makes you wonder, what drew him to these new challenges time and time again? Was it just a sense of adventure, or was there something more driving him?
That's a great question, and I think the answer lies in the spirit of both Blandford and his congregations. These weren't just relocations or transfers. He was drawn to communities that had a shared vision, this hunger for something more. And in Westgate, he found that same pioneering spirit he embodied.
Okay, so what's the story with Christ Church? Was it another fixer-upper, or did he inherit a grand cathedral this time?
Let's just say Christchurch was a testament to faith over facilities. When Blandford arrived, they didn't even have a proper building. They were holding services in a tent.
Wait a minute, you're telling me this renowned church builder, this man who took on the archbishop himself, started his time in Westgate under a canvas roof. Talk about humble beginnings.
It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? This is a man who'd overseen the construction of churches and a manse, yet he's willing to roll up his sleeves and meet his congregation where they are, literally under a tent. Speaks to his dedication, I think, to serving his community no matter what.
That's incredible. Imagine the dedication of those early congregants, braving the elements week after week, all because they believed in something bigger than themselves. Did they ever manage to build a proper church?
They did. And it didn't take long. Within a few years, thanks in no small part to Blandford's leadership and that same community spirit, they laid the foundation stone for a new church building in 1883.
Okay, so from a tent to a foundation stone in just a couple of years. That's remarkable. It really shows what people can achieve when they come together with a shared vision. Did Thomas get to see the finished product?
Absolutely. The new Christ Church officially opened in 1884, a testament to his vision and the unwavering support of his congregation. Can you imagine that feeling? Seeing this physical manifestation of their faith come to life after all those years under a tent.
Gives me chills just thinking about it. It really drives home the message we've been uncovering throughout this whole deep dive. Even in a world that's constantly changing, even when faced with challenges that seem impossible, it's that unwavering commitment to community, to something bigger than ourselves, that truly makes a difference.
And that commitment to community, that legacy of service, it didn't end with Thomas. It seems those values took root in his family as well.
Oh, really? Tell me more. What happened to his family? Did they stick around Westgate?
Many of them did, and they carried on his legacy in their own ways. The sources mention that several of his children became teachers, even ran a school in Westgate called Westgate College.
So, not only did he build churches, but he also nurtured future generations of educators. It's like his impulse just keeps rippling outwards. That's really beautiful.
It is, and the connection to Christ Church doesn't end there. Inside the church, there's a plaque commemorating the contributions of his son, Arthur Henry Blandford, and daughter, Edith Sarah King, who, along with their sister Ellen, remain dedicated members throughout their lives.
A fitting tribute to the lasting impact of their father's work. It's incredible to think that the values he embodied continue to resonate generations later. It makes you think about your own life. What kind of legacy are you building? What will people remember you for long after you're gone?
Those are powerful questions, ones we should all ask ourselves. But as for Thomas Blandford, his story reminds us that even seemingly ordinary lives can have an extraordinary impact. He may not have led armies or held political office, but through his unwavering commitment to peace, to community, to building something lasting, he left an indelible mark on the world.
He certainly did. And while he passed away in 1902 at the age of 77, his story continues to inspire. It's a story that reminds us that true leadership isn't about power or prestige, but about service, about lifting others up, about creating a world that's a little bit brighter, a little bit more just, a little bit more peaceful.
And as we close this chapter of the deep dive, let's not forget that Thomas Blandford is buried in Herne Bay Cemetery, the very cemetery he fought so hard to make a place of unity and inclusion, a testament to his vision, and a fitting resting place for a man who dedicated his life to bringing people together.
What a journey. It's amazing how these scattered pieces of information, these glimpses into the past, can come together to paint such a vivid portrait of a life well lived. This deep dive into the life of Rev Thomas Blandford has left me feeling inspired, challenged, and hopeful. It's a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference in our own unique ways. What will your legacy be?